Marcus slid the notarized property deed across the mahogany table of the estate lawyer's office, fully believing he had just stolen our family's $950,000 home while our father lay dying in a hospice bed. I didn't cry. I took action. 72 hours later, his entire carefully constructed reality collapsed and he never saw it coming. Growing up, there was a strict, unspoken hierarchy in our household. Marcus was the sun, and the rest of us were just dusty planets expected to quietly orbit his brilliance. My father was a practical man. He ran a successful appliance repair business out of a cramped workshop behind our house. While Marcus was away at a private out-of-state college, tuition fully paid in cash, of course I was the one in the back of that dusty shop. I spent my teenage years learning how to run hardware diagnostics on moisture-proof appliance control boards. I learned how to measure the capacitance of blown components on washing machine circuits and fix the delicate wiring of industrial air conditioning units. Dad and I had a quiet, grease-stained understanding. We worked. Marcus shined. Marcus was the kind of guy who wore a suit to Thanksgiving dinner just to remind everyone he had an office job, even though he was secretly drowning in credit card debt. He was the golden child, the undisputed heir to a kingdom he had never lifted a single finger to build. Whenever he needed a bailout, Dad would quietly take on extra weekend shifts repairing commercial HVAC systems just to wire Marcus the money. I swallowed the humiliation. I kept my voice steady. I told myself that keeping the peace was the right thing to do, that being the responsible daughter was my duty. 3 weeks passed in what felt like a blur of medical monitors and whispered consultations. Then everything accelerated. Dad suffered a massive stroke on a Tuesday afternoon. The doctors told us the damage was extensive and irreversible. He fell into a deep, unresponsive state, relying entirely on a ventilator. The man who could diagnose a fried circuit board by smell alone was suddenly trapped inside a body that refused to obey him. I moved into the hospice room, sleeping on a terrible vinyl chair that cracked every time I shifted. I managed his care, spoke to the nurses, and kept the machinery of his life running. Marcus predictably did not show up immediately. He cited an essential corporate retreat and told me to keep him posted. It was only when the doctors gently suggested we start making end-of-life arrangements that my brother suddenly found the time to book a first-class flight home. When Marcus walked into the hospice room, he didn't look at the man in the bed. He looked at the paperwork on the bedside table. He played the part of the grieving son beautifully whenever the nurses walked in, adopting a hushed, tragic tone that made my blood run cold. But the moment the door clicked shut, his eyes would dart around the room, assessing, calculating. He started asking highly specific questions about Dad's lockbox, the location of the original property deed, and whether Dad had updated his life insurance beneficiaries. I told him the truth. Dad had a simple will, splitting everything 50-50. The house, which had skyrocketed in value due to gentrification and was now worth nearly $1 million, was meant to be divided equally between us. Marcus nodded, but I saw the slight tightening of his jaw. 50% was never going to be enough for a man who believed he was entitled to the whole world. A few days later, the hospital Wi-Fi kept dropping, so I stepped out to a nearby coffee shop to send some necessary emails regarding Dad's business accounts. The connection kept buffering. I only caught fragments of the incoming messages, but I saw enough. A notification popped up from the county recorder's office, a service I had set up years ago to monitor the title of the house after Dad almost fell for a contractor scam. A new document had just been recorded against our family address. A quitclaim deed. According to the digital scan on my phone, my comatose father had somehow miraculously woken up, signed away his entire ownership of the house solely to Marcus, had it notarized and gone back to sleep. The audacity was breathtaking. Marcus had waited until I left the room, orchestrated a forged signature, and pushed it through the county system. He thought I was too distracted by grief to notice. He thought I was just the quiet, loyal sister who fixed washing machines and never asked questions. He forgot that the people who work quietly in the background are the ones who see every single wire. If you are listening to this right now, and something feels painfully familiar, I need you to understand how a family system like this actually functions. In a narcissistic family structure, the golden child isn't actually loved more. They are simply the chosen extension of the parent's fragile ego. The scapegoat, the one who stays behind, who does the heavy lifting, who pays the emotional bills, is the mirror that reflects the family's dysfunction. You might be confusing your guilt with shame. Guilt is feeling bad about something you did. Shame is feeling like you were bad because you set a boundary. When you are conditioned to be the peacekeeper, enforcing a basic boundary feels like an act of violence. It isn't. It is an act of survival. If you are currently setting yourself on fire to keep a toxic sibling warm, the most concrete thing you can do today is stop explaining yourself to people who are committed to miss you and understanding you. Document your reality, put it in a safe place, and step back. What I found inside that digital folder from the county recorder changed everything I thought I knew about my brother, and set the stage for a reckoning he could never have prepared. D4. What I have told you so far is how my family broke me down into a manageable, obedient machine. What comes next is how I used that exact same machinery to dismantle my brother's life. I sat in that coffee shop for another 20 minutes. My latte went ice cold in the paper cup. I didn't cry. I didn't call Marcus screaming. The emotional temperature in my body simply dropped to absolute zero. For 34 years, I had operated on empathy. In that moment, I switched to forensics. I zoomed in on the digital scan of the forged power of attorney attached to the quitclaim deed. Marcus had presented this secondary document to transfer the house to himself. I looked at the bottom right corner of the screen. The notary stamp was a slightly smudged circle of blue ink, but the name inside it was perfectly legible. Chloe Matthews. My breath caught. I blinked, pulling the screen closer to my face. Chloe Matthews. In high school, Chloe had been my lab partner in AP chemistry for a full year. She was a quiet girl with a distinct, nervous laugh who used to come over to our house to study on weekends. Marcus, who was a senior when we were sophomores, used to walk right past her without acknowledging her existence. To him, people like Chloe and me were invisible. He had no idea who she was back then, and clearly he had not bothered to read the name on her desk plaque yesterday. I packed my bags. I left the coffee shop and drove straight to the address listed on the notary stamp, a small, independent strip mall shipping and printing center. I walked in. It wasn't a dramatic, cinematic entrance. The bell above the door chimed cheerfully, and there was a man at the counter arguing loudly about international shipping rates for a set of golf clubs. I waited patiently in line for 15 minutes, staring at a display of padded envelopes. When I finally stepped up to the counter, Chloe looked up. It took her exactly 3 seconds to recognize me. "Clara?" she asked, her eyes widening behind her glasses. "Oh my God, it's been years. How are you?" I didn't exchange pleasantries. I kept my voice steady. "Chloe, I need to ask you about a document you notarized yesterday. A power of attorney for Marcus, my brother." Her warm smile faded instantly. The professional mask slipped back on, but there was a flicker of confusion in her eyes. "Clara, you know I can't discuss client transactions. It's against regulations." "Chloe, my father has been in a medically induced coma for 3 weeks," I said. The words hung heavy in the air between us. The shipping center suddenly felt dead silent. He physically could not have signed that document yesterday, nor could he have been present in this store to authorize it. Chloe's face drained of color. She stepped back, pulling a heavy, leather-bound notary journal from a locked drawer under the counter. Her hands were shaking slightly as she flipped to the previous day's entries. "Your brother came in," she whispered, her finger tracing the ink line. "He had a signed letter. He said your father was bedridden at home, that the family was in a financial crisis, and he just needed the stamp for the POA that your dad had supposedly signed that morning in front of witnesses. He had your father's ID. He had the matching signatures. He was so smooth about it. He tipped me $20 and told me God bless you." "Did you witness my father sign it, Chloe?" I asked, my tone flat. She looks like she was going to be sick. "No, I broke protocol. He was so convincing, Clara. I just stamped it." "He used you," I said simply. "And he's trying to steal my father's house." I didn't threaten her. I didn't need to. Chloe knew the legal jeopardy she was in. Falsifying a notary journal and stamping a document without the signatory present was a career-ending move, potentially carrying criminal fraud charges. I told her I didn't want to ruin her life, but I needed her to do exactly what I said to fix it. She agreed instantly. She made me a certified, signed copy of her journal entry and wrote a sworn statement right there on the shipping counter. This brings me to a truth that most people learn far too late. A paper trail is not just a collection of receipts. It is a timeline of intent. When dealing with financial abuse, you cannot rely on morality, and you cannot rely on what you know to be true. The system only speaks the language of documentation. If you suspect someone is manipulating assets, stop arguing with them. Arguments are vapor. Start quietly pulling records. Pull property tax histories, pull LLC registrations, pull visitor logs. Financial abusers are arrogant, and arrogance always leaves a sloppy administrative footprint. Secure the evidence before you ever let them know you suspect a thing. I didn't just stop at the notary journal. I drove back to our empty house. Marcus had clearly turned the living room upside down looking for documents. I could see the scuff marks on the hardwood, but he never liked getting grease on his hands. He never checked the workshop. Hidden inside a hollowed-out vintage radio casing under the steel workbench was Dad's actual lockbox. Inside was the original property deed and a notarized letter Dad had written 2 years ago, explicitly revoking all previous powers of attorney due to Marcus's undisclosed gambling debts. Dad had hidden Marcus's shame to protect him. I took the documents. I went to the hospital administration desk and formally requested a certified copy of the visitor logs and Dad's medical intake records, proving the exact date his coma began. I built an impenetrable fortress of paper. Then I returned to the hospice room. Marcus was sitting in the visitor's chair, his feet propped up on the edge of Dad's bed frame, aggressively typing on his phone. "Hey," he said, not looking up. I was thinking, when Dad passes we should probably look into selling the shop equipment quickly. And you'll need to figure out your living situation. The housing market is crazy right now, best to get a head start. He was evicting me. My father was lying 3 feet away, kept alive by a machine, and my brother was casually orchestrating my homelessness. "You're right," I said, my voice deadpan. "I'll start getting my things organized." He finally looked up, a smug, satisfied smirk playing on his lips. "Good. I'm glad we're on the same page. It's just business, Clara. What I am about to tell you is the part I almost left out. Because what happened next when I summoned Dad's estate lawyer to that very room was a dismantling so brutal, it still scares me a little to think about it. For 34 years, I had absorbed his arrogant directives quietly. That obedience ended the morning the estate lawyer arrived. It was Thursday, 48 hours after I visited Chloe. I called Dad's attorney, Arthur Sterling, requesting an urgent meeting at the hospice center. Marcus assumed this was a standard estate planning meeting. He showed up wearing a tailored navy blazer, carrying an expensive leather portfolio, looking every inch the responsible heir. The room smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee. Dad's ventilator hissed in a rhythmic cadence. It wasn't a cinematic boardroom, right as Mr. Sterling walked in. He dropped his glasses, and I awkwardly skittered under Dad's bed. We waited in uncomfortable silence while the distinguished lawyer got on his knees to fish them out. Once he sat back up and opened his briefcase, the air in the small room shifted. "Arthur, thanks for coming down here," Marcus began, leaning forward. "I know it's unconventional, but given Dad's condition, I've already taken proactive steps to secure the family assets so Clara doesn't have to worry about it. I filed a quitclaim deed yesterday, authorized by Dad just before things took a turn for the worse. It puts the house in my name, which will streamline the probate process immensely." I didn't look at Arthur. I looked directly into Marcus's eyes, keeping my voice steady. "That's incredibly proactive of you, Marcus. It's just unfortunate that your timeline requires Dad to have been physically present at a strip mall printing center while simultaneously being on a ventilator here." I pulled a manila envelope from my bag. I slid 3 pieces of paper across the bedside table. Dad's medical intake form from 3 weeks ago, the hospital's security visitor log, and Chloe Matthews signed, sworn confs. Sion detailing the exact nature of the forgery. Marcus stared at the papers as if they were venomous snakes. The arrogant smirk vanished instantly, replaced by a sickly, chalky pallor that drained the life from his face. His mouth opened and closed twice without any sound coming out, his brain desperately misfiring as it tried to construct a plausible lie. His hands, resting on his expensive leather portfolio, began to tremble uncontrollably. He looked frantically between me, the documents, and the lawyer, suddenly realizing he had walked blindly into a steel trap with no exits. Mr. Sterling picked up the documents, reading through them with the cold, detached precision of a seasoned litigator. He let out a heavy sigh, took off his glasses, and stared at Marcus with unmasked disgust. "You're not the heir, Marcus. You're a felon." "Clara, this is a massive misunderstanding," Marcus stammered, his voice cracking. The polished CEO persona evaporated, leaving behind a terrified little boy. "Dad wanted me to have the house." "You know he did. I was just executing his wishes a little early to save us taxes." "You're twisting this. You're trying to tear this family apart over a technicality. A forged signature and a fraudulent notary stamp are not a technicality, Mr. Sterling interjected, his voice carrying the gravelly weight of the law. "They are felony offenses, Marcus. Attempted grand theft of real property. If Clara takes this folder to the district attorney today, you won't be streamlining probate. You will be facing 5 to 10 years in a state penitentiary." Marcus practically fell back into his chair. "Clara, please," he whispered, the panic finally breaking through his voice. "We're family. You can't do this to me. Think about Dad. He would hate this. He would want us to stick together." I let out a short, humorless laugh. If you're listening to this and something feels familiar, remember this. People who scream the loudest about loyalty have almost always done the least to earn it. When toxic people invoke the concept of family, they aren't asking for love. They are demanding amnesty. Boundaries are simply a clear description of what you will and will not accept. Enforcing them is not an act of cruelty, it is the ultimate clarity. You cannot reason with someone who actively benefits from misunderstanding you. The moment you stop arguing and start enforcing consequences, the illusion of their power shatters entirely. "You don't get to invoke Dad's name," I told him, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Not after you stood in this room, watching him breathe through a plastic tube, and calculated exactly how fast you could steal the roof over my head." Mr. Sterling tapped his pen against his clipboard. "Here is what is going to happen," the lawyer stated calmly. "I am drawing up a formal relinquishment of all your rights as an executor, Marcus. You will sign a secondary document admitting that the quitclaim deed was filed in error and you are rescinding it immediately. You will also sign a legally binding agreement waiving any contest to the estate once your father passes. Clara assumes full legal control. If you refuse to sign by 5 o'clock tomorrow, I will personally drive this evidence to the prosecutor's office." Marcus looked at the linoleum floor. The golden child, stripped of his gilded armor, was just a coward in a nice suit. He didn't argue. He didn't fight back. He simply nodded, his eyes hollow and defeated. He picked up his leather portfolio, stood up, and walked out of the hospice room without looking at Dad once. The room went dead silent. The only sound left was the steady, rhythmic breathing of the ventilator. Mr. Sterling packed away his files, offered his quiet condolences, and left me alone. I sat back down in that terrible vinyl chair. I had one. I had protected the house, protected my father's legacy, and neutralized the biggest threat to my future. I had the power, the paper trail, and the lawyer's backing. I thought walking out of that room with his surrender was the absolute end of the war. But what I discovered the following Monday morning proved that Marcus hadn't just tried to steal the house, he had already detonated a financial bomb in my father's name and the tie. Mur was about to hit zero. I thought the worst was behind me. I was wrong because a cornered narcissist, stripped of their narrative control, is the most dangerous version of themselves. When I walked into the local branch of my father's bank on Monday morning, I carried Mr. Sterling's legally binding documents. My objective was to present the revocation of all prior powers of attorney, establish myself as the sole proxy, and ensure Marcus couldn't touch the liquid assets. The bank manager, Elaine, who had known my dad for 20 years, guided me into her office. "Clara, it's good to see you, though I wish it were under better circumstances," Elaine said, pulling up the commercial accounts for Dad's appliance repair business. "I assume you're here to finalize the disbursement for the equipment loan?" My blood ran cold. "Elaine, What equipment loan? She frowned, turning her monitor slightly. The $85,000 commercial line of credit. Marcus came in last Wednesday with the power of attorney. He said your father was upgrading the entire workshop's diagnostic machinery. The funds are scheduled to wire to his LLC vendor account this afternoon. Marcus hadn't just tried to steal the house. He had used the exact same forged document to leverage my father's pristine credit history into an $85,000 payout, funneled directly into a dummy corporation. He knew the house deed might take months to clear probate, but a commercial loan was instant, untraceable cash. He was going to drain the business dry and leave me the debt. Elaine, I said, my voice eerily calm, stop the wire. Freeze every single account associated with my father's social security number. Right now. This is where reality hit a terrifying speed bump. The bank's verification server was undergoing maintenance. For 20 agonizing minutes, Elaine's terminal was locked. I sat in that freezing glass office, staring at a faded poster for mortgage rates, listening to the wall clock tick, unsure if the wire transfer had already processed. I thought about the years I spent repairing circuit boards in the dusty workshop, while Dad meticulously saved every penny to build that credit line. It wasn't movie perfect. It was a miserable, helpless weight, sitting perfectly still while my family's legacy hung by a digital thread. Finally, the screen blinked back to life. Elaine's fingers flew across the keyboard. She hit the kill switch on the wire exactly 14 minutes before the clearinghouse would have finalized the batch processing for the day. It stopped. She exhaled, her face pale. Clara, if this was unauthorized, the bank's federal fraud department has to be notified. This crosses state lines. This is wire fraud. Notify them, I said without hesitation. Give them everything. If you are listening to this and you have ever been manipulated by someone who claimed to love you, you need to recognize how narcissistic systems use your own empathy as a weapon against you. Notice what Marcus did. He justified the theft by using my father's illness as a cover story. Narcissists constantly manufacture crises, forcing you into a position of compassion, and then they exploit that exact compassion to bypass your boundaries. They weaponize the benefit of the doubt. You are being held hostage by your own decency. To disarm this weapon, stop reacting to their emotional emergencies and respond strictly to their actions. When you remove empathy from the equation, their entire strategy collapses. Today, your action item is to look at the biggest crisis the toxic person in your life is currently claiming and ask yourself, is this a real emergency or just a smokescreen for their entitlement? By Tuesday morning, the fallout was catastrophic. The bank didn't just freeze my father's accounts. They flagged the intended recipient of the fraudulent wire transfer, Marcus's LLC. Because Marcus used his personal banking profile to set up the dummy corporation at the same institution, the fraud alert cascaded. The bank's automated security protocols locked his checking account, his savings, and his personal credit cards pending a federal investigation. At 11 a.m., my phone started vibrating relentlessly. It was Marcus. I didn't answer. I let it go to voicemail. Over the next 3 hours, he left 6 messages. The progression of his tone was a masterclass in psychological collapse. The first message was demanding and arrogant, ordering me to call the bank and clear up a stupid administrative hold. The third message was frantic, his voice pitching higher as he realized his credit cards were declining at the grocery store. By the 6th message, he was sobbing. He begged me to fix it. He told me he was going to lose his apartment, that his car payment was bouncing, that his life was over. He expected me to save him. He expected the scapegoat to swoop in, absorb the damage, and restore the golden child to his rightful place. For 34 years, that is exactly what I would have done. I would have felt that familiar, heavy guilt settling into my chest, and I would have made the call to fix his mess. But I remembered the forged signature. I remembered him sitting next to my dying father, telling me to pack my bags and get out of my own home. I saved the voicemails to a secure cloud drive. I forwarded them directly to Mr. Sterling and the bank's fraud investigator as supplementary evidence of his state of mind, proving he knew exactly what he was doing when he filed that loan application. I didn't text him back. I let the silence be my only answer. But a desperate man with nothing left to lose is a dangerous variable. Marcus realized I wasn't going to save him, so he decided to deploy the one weapon he still had left, our extended family. What happened at the hospital the following night is something I will never forget, and it forced me to make the hardest decision yet. By Wednesday evening, Marcus had orchestrated his final, desperate play. Knowing that his bank accounts were frozen, and the legal walls were closing in, he decided to weaponize the only demographic that might still buy his manufactured victimhood, our extended family. When I arrived at the hospice center for my evening shift, the waiting room outside the ICU was entirely too crowded. Aunt Linda, Uncle David, and 2 of my cousins were sitting in a tight circle around Marcus. He was weeping. It was a spectacular, Oscar-worthy performance. His face was buried in his hands, and his shoulders shook with theatrical grief. Aunt Linda stood up the moment I walked through the double doors. Her face was tight with righteous indignation. "Clara," she said, crossing her arms, "we need to talk about what you are doing to your brother. He just told us that you used some obscure legal loophole to freeze his bank accounts. Your father is lying in that room fighting for his life, and you are trying to bankrupt the only son he has over petty jealousy." I didn't defend myself. I didn't raise my voice or try to match her emotional intensity. I simply unzipped my tote bag and pulled out the thick, red manila folder I had compiled over the last 72 hours. "I haven't frozen anything, Aunt Linda," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy hospital air like a scalpel. "The federal government did." I opened the folder. The metal clasp briefly snagged on the sleeve of my sweater, an annoying little friction that forced everyone to wait an agonizing 3 seconds in total silence while I awkwardly untangled it. Once it was open, I handed the stack of documents directly to Uncle David, who had spent 30 years as a corporate auditor. "What you are looking at," I explained calmly, "is a quitclaim deed transferring Dad's house to Marcus, dated this past Monday. Underneath it is the sworn confession from the notary who stamped it, admitting Marcus bribed her to notarize our comatose father's forged signature. And on the very bottom is the fraud alert from Dad's commercial bank, confirming Marcus used that same forgery to attempt an $85,000 wire transfer into a shell company." Uncle David put on his reading glasses. He read the notary's confession. Then he read the bank's fraud alert. The color drained from his face so quickly he looked physically ill. He slowly lowered the papers and stared at Marcus. "You forged his signature on a commercial loan?" David whispered, the horror vibrating in his chest. "While he's on a ventilator." Marcus stood up, his tearful facade completely shattering, replaced by frantic, cornered panic. "Uncle David, it's not what it looks like. The business needed liquidity, Dad, and I talked about it weeks ago. I was just trying to protect the assets." "Stop talking," Aunt Linda snapped. The matriarch of the family, who had just spent 20 minutes defending him, stepped away from Marcus as if he were carrying a highly contagious disease. "Do not say another word." That was the exact moment Marcus lost everything. He didn't just lose the house or the money, he lost the carefully curated illusion of his own superiority. In front of the family that had worshipped him since childhood, he was exposed not as a successful CEO, but as a cowardly, predatory thief. The waiting room went dead silent. Without another word, Uncle David handed the folder back to me, put his arm around his wife, and they walked out of the hospital. They never spoke to Marcus again. The legal consequences moved with brutal, mechanical efficiency. 2 weeks later, the district attorney officially filed felony forgery and wire fraud charges against Marcus. The arrest warrant was served at his corporate office. The public humiliation of being escorted out of a glass high-rise in handcuffs cost him his lucrative job immediately. Because his personal accounts remained frozen under the federal investigation, he could not afford a private defense attorney and had to rely on an overworked public defender. He was evicted from his luxury apartment the following month. Dad passed away quietly in his sleep 6 weeks later. I was holding his hand when the monitors finally went flat. There was no chaos, no screaming, just a quiet, profound peace in that little room. Marcus was not allowed to attend the funeral due to his bail conditions and a strict restraining order I had filed on behalf of the estate. I inherited the house and the business exactly as Dad's original will intended. I sold the heavy appliance repair equipment for a fair price to a young mechanic Dad had been quietly mentoring, and I used the funds to completely renovate the house. This brings me to the final truth about financial abuse within a family system. We are deeply conditioned by society to keep it in the family and settle disputes behind closed doors to avoid public shame. But secrecy is the exact environment where abusers thrive. When you protect their reputation, you are actively funding your own destruction. The true cost of keeping the peace is always your own sanity and security. For 34 years, I believed that my value in this family was tied directly to my utility. I thought that if I fixed enough broken things, if I stayed quiet enough, I would eventually earn a safe place at the table. What do I know now that I didn't know before this happened? I know that you cannot earn love from a system designed to exploit you. I used to look at my grease-stained hands and feel a sense of shame, comparing myself to my brother's manicured, corporate success. But those hands built a foundation of absolute reality, while his were busy constructing a house of cards. I learned that the most terrifying thing you can do to an abuser is to stop participating in their fiction. The peace I have now in this quiet, empty house wasn't given to me. I had to rip it out of the hands of someone who wanted me destroyed. And if I had to do it all over again, I wouldn't change a single agonizing second of it. Do you understand the difference between surviving and truly living? So what do you think? Did I go too far or not far enough? Let me know in the comments below.